So let's start us off with um, the issue regarding Jeconiah, because this also is going to get us into the genealogies of Matthew and Luke, because they try to make that work. And I'm like, well, Matthew has a genealogy of Jesus, and Luke has a genealogy of Jesus, and sometimes they'll say one of them's Mary's, even though they both clearly say it's Joseph. That it's both Joseph's genealogy, two very contradictory genealogies. They can't both be true. And in Matthew's genealogy, Jesus has Jeconiah in there, and in Luke's genealogy, Jeconiah is not there. Is it Jeconiah cursed in Jeremiah chapter 22 that his descendants will never rule Israel?
Jeconiah was like the Jewish Caligula in every way. Only thing is, Caligula lasted longer than he did. And the curse from Jeremiah 22, verse 30, is that none of his descendants would ever sit on the throne again. And just to make the point of how serious this was, he was carried off to Babylon, and his heir, which means the next person who was king after him, was not his son, but rather his uncle. So by having his uncle as the next king, it accomplished two things. His descendants no longer sat on the throne of David, as promised in Jeremiah, but yet his uncle, of course, his paternal uncle, is a direct descendant of David and Solomon. Whoever wrote the book of Matthew, believe it or not, was keenly aware of this. Luke avoids this because Luke's genealogy goes through Nathan, the different son of David. But it's very striking that Matthew's genealogy, although we are promised in Matthew chapter 1, verse 17, that there are 3 sets of 14 generations, totaling 42 generations from Abraham until Jesus. As it turns out, 5 of them are removed. And 1 extra one is removed. So if you count all the generations, somebody removed 1 extra one, but they actually removed the father of Jeconiah rather than Jeconiah. And that's a mistake when trying to corrupt the text. And that's why, so Jeconiah in Hebrew is Yehoiachin, and Jeconiah's father is Yehoiakim. They're virtually identical. So although after we're given the pile of names from Abraham all the way to Jesus, there are, and then in verse 17 we're told, we have 3 sets of 14, because David's name in Gematria adds up to 14, Daled Vav Daled 464. So it was a novel approach. Someone removed what he thought was an accursed name. Luke doesn't have this problem because Luke goes through the wrong son, goes through Nathan rather than Solomon. So it really is quite strange. But verse 11 of Matthew 1 has Jeconiah there, strikingly. So it's sort of a blunder, and therefore it's a cursed genealogy. And therefore, if this is in fact the genealogy of Jesus, then it not only doesn't demonstrate that Jesus is the Messiah, which Matthew sets out in the opening passage, but demonstrates that he can't possibly be the Messiah because he comes from a Christian genealogy. I remember years ago debating a fellow in New York, a Christian minister, and he replied in a debate, that's why you need the virgin birth. And Josh McDowell, in his famous book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, says the same thing. His reply is, that's why Jesus had to be born of a virgin in order to escape, to dodge this awkward problem. So, and because he's born to a virgin, so he's not really a descendant of Jeconiah. And I then asked him, so then why then did Matthew provide this genealogy if it's not Jesus' genealogy? And his reply was, I don't know. And that's how the debate ended. I mean, why give it then? If the virgin birth is rescuing you, then of course we all know that the genealogies in both Luke 3 and Matthew 1 are the putative genealogies of Joseph rather than of Jesus, so they're not relevant in any case.
And I'm familiar with the apologist response to these, and they're not good responses, but it's worthwhile to bring them up, or else they're going to be in your comment section after the video, which is that, well, everyone knows that Zerubbabel was a leader within Israel after the exilic period, but they actually fails the test because it says in Jeremiah 22:30, none of his offspring shall succeed in sitting on the throne of David and ruling again in Judah. And Zerubbabel was a governor, but he was never on a throne. He was never a king. He was never anointed as a king, as far as I'm aware, was he?
Exactly. Zerubbabel is a governor, and he's spoken of very highly in the book of Haggai. Like, I placed my signet ring on him. So this is really awkward. So as it turns out, this very wicked king has a great-great-grandson whose name is Zerubbabel, who's born in Babylon and rules as a governor along with Yehoshua ben Yehotzadok, who is the high priest. But he can't become king because of the curse, precisely.
And you touched on it before, but the fact that the lineage goes through Nathan in the book of Luke is a little bit problematic, because we've got a couple of declarations in the Old Testament basically saying that it's going to go through Solomon. So 1 Chronicles 22:9-10 says, "Behold, the son shall be born to you, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all of his enemies all around. His name shall be Solomon, for I will give peace and quietness to Israel in his days. He shall build a house for my name, and he shall be my son. I will be his father. I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever." There's no promise to Nathan. It's always through Solomon.
Same thing in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 through 16. It's possible, like, why would Luke take such an awkward genealogy? And it's possible that Luke is more careful than Matthew. And I can give many examples where Matthew blunders and Luke avoids the fulfillment citations as well, that Luke took that direction because he wanted to avoid the cursed genealogy. It's quite right.
That was my assumption as well, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me as well. Because it would seem like the apologetic excuse or implied excuse might be, well, Jesus spiritually is the son of David. He's not really the son. But
Right.
well, then by that logic, then Jeconiah's the curse upon Jeconiah would have to apply spiritually to Jesus. So
there's another response as well, and that is the Talmud. So there is an opinion in the Talmud that Jeconiah, he's carried off to Babylon. He's in a prison, in a dungeon, and he repents in prison. His wife is brought to him. She's unclean. He doesn't sleep with her and repents. And that God actually forgave him in exile. And the Talmud's point is to say, you see that a person could atone for their sins even in exile. So there is that opinion that no doubt missionaries will use. You have to be careful with this. If a missionary ever raises that issue, they would have hoped that they never opened their mouth, because they created an even bigger problem. You know, it's always the cover-up that gets people in trouble. I'm old enough to remember Watergate, and that was quite a time. And it was the cover-up. Well, so by using the Talmud, of course, they create the problem that the Talmud also says that Jesus isn't the Messiah, so the Talmud is authoritative. But it actually creates even an existential problem for the church by claiming that God ultimately forgives Jeconiah. Because if God forgave Jeconiah while he's in exile, as the story goes, he was lowered into prison, his wife was put there, she wasn't clean, Jeconiah repents in exile, and God forgave him. If that's in fact the case, that demonstrates that God will forgive someone without the shedding of blood, without a sacrifice, and then you don't need Jesus anymore. So that literally upends the entire base of the Pauline Christology. In Christian theology, no one's effort, no one's repentance, no one's initiative, no one's works could adequately atone for sins. And you need blood, and without the shedding of blood, there's no atonement, Hebrews 9:22. So if we just steel man that say, okay, we're going with the Talmud on this opinion, you actually have created a bigger and more existential problem, because now Jeconiah is actually forgiven in exile for his sins without any sacrifice. And if Jeconiah could be forgiven, and he was a really horrible fellow, well, he could surely forgive you without Jesus. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ואת נעשה בחפצו כל